And back in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17, the word offered is in the perfect tense, which means it's settled. Abraham wasn't in conflict walking up that mountain. He had already settled in his heart that God had called him to do something that he was going to do. It was already settled in his heart. But how could he do this? I'm going to read to you from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19. You don't have to turn there if you don't want to, but here's what he said back in 11:19. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, for which he also received him back as a type. Abraham said, basically, I don't know what God is going to do, but that is God's problem. Isn't that amazing? That's God's problem. That's not my problem. And if God decides to take your life, then God will resurrect you from the dead. What kind of faith is that? God want us to have a conference? God will pay for it. Wow. That impressed me. And that's what we have here with Abraham. Abraham concluded that his God was big enough to keep his promise. That God would provide what God promised. And he knew he would. Then she summarized her counsel with a pointed and spontaneous encouragement. God's going to help you. He has to. The reason she said that is because they had been talking about the promises of God. That God never leaves us or forsakes us. That God is always our help. That God is always our source of comfort. That God is always our fortress. That God has promised certain things. And so she says, God will help you because God promised to help you. That's faith. When you don't have the answers, you don't have the solution, you have no idea how it's going to unravel, but you know God is going to help you because God has promised to do so. And then he begins to take that knife to kill his son. And at that point, in verse 11, I'm sure he had his eyes shut, by the way. He couldn't bear to see the death of his own son, the pain. And he's here in verse 11, the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here am I. The most sweetest words he's ever heard. Abraham, Abraham. Here am I. Here am I. You know, sometimes deliverance happens at the last possible moment.